Hi friends, today is 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Let's see what the Word has to say to our hearts today. Now regarding the questions you asked in your letter, see Paul's replying to them. I love that. Yes, it is good to abstain from sexual relations, but because there is so much sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman should have her own husband. The husband should fulfill his wife's sexual needs, and the wife should fulfill her husband's needs. The wife gives authority over her body to her husband, and the husband gives authority over his body to his wife. Do not deprive each other of sexual relations unless you both agree to refrain from sexual intimacy for a limited time so you can give yourselves more completely to prayer. Afterward, you should come together again so that Satan won't be able to tempt you because of your lack of self-control. I say this as a concession, not as a command. But I wish everyone were single just as I am. Yet each person has a special gift from God of one kind or another. So I say to those who aren't married and to widows, it's better to stay unmarried, just as I am. But if you can't control yourselves, you should go ahead and marry. It's better to marry than to burn with lust. He's very practical. But for those who are married, I have a command that comes not from me, but from the Lord. A wife must not leave her husband, but if she does leave him, let her remain single or else be reconciled to him. And the husband must not leave his wife. Now I will speak to the rest of you. Though I do not have a direct command from the Lord. If a fellow believer has a wife who is not a believer, and she is willing to continue living with him, he must not leave her. And if a believing woman has a husband who is not a believer, and he is willing to continue living with her, she must not leave him. For the believing wife brings holiness to her marriage, and the believing husband brings holiness to his marriage. There's some real practical hope and help in these verses right here. Can you see that? Otherwise, your children would not be holy, but now they are holy. Verse 15, but if the husband or wife who isn't a believer insists on leaving, let them go. In such cases, the believing wife or husband is no longer bound to the other, for God has called you to live in peace. Don't you wives realize that your husbands might be saved because of you? And don't you husbands realize that your wives might be saved because of you? Doesn't that give you some hope today? Each of you should continue to live in whatever situation the Lord has placed you, and remain as you were when God first called you. This is my rule for all the churches. For instance, a man who was circumcised before he became a believer should not try to reverse it. And the man who was uncircumcised when he became a believer should not be circumcised now. For it makes no difference whether or not a man has been circumcised. The important thing is to keep God's commandments. Yes, each of you should remain as you were when God called you. Are you a slave? Don't let that worry you. But if you get a chance to be free, take it. Verse 22, and remember, if you were a slave when the Lord called you, you are now free in the Lord. And if you were free when the Lord called you, you are now a slave of Christ. God paid a high price for you, so don't be enslaved to the world, by the world. Each of you, dear brothers and sisters, should remain as you were when God first called you. Now, regarding your question, another question, about the young women who are not yet married, I do not have a command from the Lord for them, but the Lord in His mercy has given me wisdom that can be trusted, and I will share it with you. Because of the present crisis, I think it is best to remain as you are. Now, we might want to go back and find out what present crisis. You know, there are a lot of extra biblical texts, historical records, and books about things that are going on in this part of the world at this time. It's so amazing. And we could even, translate that or relate it to our times and the things that we're living through in our life. Verse 27, if you have a wife, do not seek to end the marriage. If you do not have a wife, do not seek to get married. But if you do get married, it is not a sin. And if a young woman gets married, it is not a sin. However, those who get married at this time will have troubles. And I am trying to spare you those problems. Can't you see the love of Paul for his congregation, for his people? He's a good shepherd, he's a good pastor. Verse 29, but let me say this, dear brothers and sisters, the time that remains is very short. So from now on, those with wives should not focus only on their marriage. Those who weep or who rejoice or who buy things should not be absorbed by their weeping or their joy or their possessions. Those who use the things of the world should not become attached to them. For this world, as we know it, will soon pass away. I want you to be free from the concerns of this life. Woo! Okay, amen. Let's write that down. Let's really meditate on that. Lord, I want to be free from the concerns of this life. We have this little card that tells us not to be worrying about things because the Lord cares about the things that concern us. Wow, what a word. Do not be concerned about this life. He actually says, I want you to be free from the concerns of this life. That is so precious to me. An unmarried man can spend his time doing the Lord's work and thinking how to please Him. But a married man has to think about his earthly responsibilities and how to please his wife. His interests are divided. In the same way, a woman who is no longer married or who has not been married can be devoted to the Lord and holy in body and in spirit. But a married woman has to think about her earthly responsibilities and how to please her husband. I'm saying this for your benefit, not to place restrictions on you. I want you to do whatever will help you serve the Lord best, with as few distractions as possible. But if a man thinks that he's treating his fiancée improperly and will inevitably give in to his passion, let him marry her as he wishes. It's not a sin. But if he has decided firmly not to marry and there is no urgency and he can control his passion, he does well not to marry. So the person who marries his fiancée does well, and the person who doesn't marry does even better. A wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives. If her husband dies, she is free to marry anyone she wishes, but only if he loves the Lord. I love that. Big key there, ladies. They have to love the Lord first. But in my opinion, it would be better for her to stay single. And I think I am giving you counsel from God's Spirit when I say this. Now that is the end of chapter 7. And the verse that I just really, really loved and helped me through a challenging time in my life is is verse 16. Don't you wives realize that your husbands might be saved because of you? And don't you husbands realize that your wives might be saved because of you? I'm going to write that in my journal and spend some time with the Lord, and I pray that you will do the same. Be blessed.